There is a wall protecting mankind from an enemy who cannot be reasoned with, cannot be understood, and never rests. Worse still, there's precious few who can even stand in the presence of this foe without falling to madness. And those that can often join this foe. And so, we have a simple question to ask you. Who do you place to guard that wall? This was the question that weighed heavy on the mind of the Emperor of Mankind and Malcador the Sigillite in the closing days of the Horus Heresy. They needed a plan for a galaxy without their protection. To this end, they founded a chapter of Astartes, more shrouded in mystery than even the Dark Angels. When they appear in Imperial records, which they rarely do, they are written down as Chapter 666. They are the secret guards of the Imperium of Mankind. They are the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus. The Ordo Malleus is primarily concerned with the eradication of demons, which are extra-dimensional beings set on the destruction of all life in our dimension. So what does it mean to be a chamber militant of an Ordo? According to the Inquisition's 6th edition Codex 2013, an Ordo's chamber militant is essentially its army, its muscle. When an Inquisitor finds a threat that their warband can't take on, they call upon their Ordo's chamber militant for a sure stock of hardy warriors. Except the Grey Knights are a little different than most Ordos. A typical chamber militant like the Deathwatch, for example, who are the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, will, according to the Deathwatch Core Rulebook 2010, take the request from an Inquisitor. Then, they'll assess that request against others and assign forces as determined by their officials. That's because the Deathwatch and the Ordo Xenos are two separate organizations that just work very closely together. Meanwhile, the Grey Knights and the Ordo Malleus are ostensibly the same organization. Their relationship is a lot more like, say, Starfleet Security's relationship with the other branches. They were literally founded together. Effectively, a well-respected and accomplished member of the Grey Knights wields the same power within the Ordo Malleus as an Inquisitor of similar rank does. There's a lot of nuance here that we'll unpick through this video, but essentially it helps to think of the Grey Knights as an internal branch of the Ordo Malleus. Now, the Grey Knights themselves are Adeptus Astartes, the superhuman warriors of the Imperium, but they're extremely unique. Every Space Marine has an organ known as Gene Seed. This organ essentially has magic powers that grant the Space Marines some of the powers of their Primarch. A good example of this is that many Raven Guard have access to the wraith-slipping abilities of their Primarch, Corvus Corax, which can be seen in numerous 40k and Horus Heresy novels, such as Angel Exterminatus 2012. The Grey Knight's Gene Seed, though, doesn't have any direct link to any Primarch. Instead, the Grey Knight's 8th edition Codex 2017 says that their Gene Seed incorporates contributions from the Emperor of Mankind himself. Meaning, it's very likely every Grey Knight wields a fraction of the Emperor's mighty power. It also seems very likely that the Grey Knight Gene Seed incorporates genetic material from all of the Astartes legions. You see, during the Horus Heresy, Malcador the Sigillite, the right-hand man of the Emperor, set up an order of Space Marines. It seems very likely the Emperor of Mankind was heavily involved in this too, but Malcador was the main driving force. These Astartes were known as the Knights Errant. According to Garo 2017, they wore grey armor, stripped of all heraldry bar the insignia of the Sigillite. These Marines came from every legion, loyalist and traitor alike, and they went on to found the Grey Knights. It's unclear if these founding members, known as the Nine who were named, all contributed their Gene Seed for the creation of the Grey Knights Gene Seed. They could have simply been the veterans who led the freshly created Grey Knights into battle. Regardless of the details of Grey Knight Gene Seed, it is certainly peculiar. As I just mentioned, the Grey Knight's founding was initially started by Malcador the Sigillite. Essentially, Malcador and the Emperor wanted to set up an organization to defend the Imperium from the warp. This organization would go on to be the Inquisition, but originally the Inquisition was pretty much just the Ordo Malleus. But as part of the founding of the Inquisition, so too were the Grey Knights founded. The Grey Knights were founded by the 9 who were named. We're probably going to get more on this in the upcoming Scouring series, as what we have now is highly mythologized. These 9 who were named were originally members of the Knights Errant. Who made these mythological founders is revealed to us in Buried Dagger 2010. Each of these founders was a librarian from one of the Space Marine legions. These legendary heroes didn't participate in the Siege of Terra. Instead, they were sent off to found the Grey Knights on Jupiter's moon of Titan. Each of the 9 who were named would go on to found the 8 Brotherhoods of the Grey Knights. These are roughly equivalent to companies in other chapters. Each Brotherhood is then overseen by a Grand Master, the rank the original 9 who were named would occupy, except for Janus, one of the 9 who would become the very first Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights, effectively their Chapter Master. So we have to side tangent into Janus real quick because his lore is kind of insane. Originally, Janus was Revuel Arvida of the Thousand Sons Legion. In the short story Last Son of Prospero 2016, Malcador performs a ritual on Revuel for a bunch of complex warp-related reasons. Essentially, the ritual is to create something akin to a new Magnus. Very powerful beings in Warhammer, like the Primarchs, have very powerful souls. These souls can become fragmented via various arcane happenings. At the start of the Horus Heresy, between blowing up the Emperor's Webway and the events of Prospero, Magnus's soul was shattered. Malcador took one of these fragments and tried to infuse it into Revuel, trying to turn him into a sort of Shadow Magnus. Jagatai Khan found out about this ritual and was outraged because Revuel was his ward. You see, by this time, Revuel Arvida had become ostensibly an honorary White Scars legionary, and had become close friends with many of the high-ranking White Scars, including Jagatai Khan himself. So the Great Khan smashed the ritual and freed Revuel. However, what arose wasn't Revuel Arvida anymore, and nor was it Malcador's desired Shadow Magnus, but a new being, Janus. A marine whose powers we have little idea of today. Yet, his powers were great enough to fully see off the influence of Tzeentch, because Janus was unaffected by the flesh change, which was a curse inflicted upon the Thousand Sons by the Lord of Change that caused them to have extreme mutations. Before the change, Revuel was on the verge of death from the flesh change. It's not 100% confirmed that the flesh change originates from Tzeentch, but the evidence overwhelmingly points in that direction. But once again, we're probably going to find out more about Janus in the upcoming Scouring series. There's one other thing we need to talk about Janus before moving on to the rest of the Grey Knights. It is theorized that he may be the founder of the Blood Ravens. There's a couple reasons for this, and they're all pretty tenuous. Firstly is him being merged with Magnus and the Blood Ravens having a lot of psychers. Secondly, he was a part of the Corvidae cult, aka the Raven cult. And thirdly, he said knowledge is power one time. That's honestly about it. Like we said, this theory doesn't hold much water, but it's a fun thing to note. It's unclear if Janus is dead. The last we saw of him was over 1,000 years old and locked away in a vault on Titan. The structure of the Grey Knights has seemingly not changed much since their founding by the Nine. The Grey Knights sort of follow the Codex in their organization, but they were founded before the Codex was even finished, so it's interesting that lore-wise they got so close to it. According to the 5th edition Grey Knights Codex 2011, Brotherhoods are made up of roughly 100 battle brothers. These Astartes are organized into various squads, and these squads are led by Justicars, the Grey Knight equivalent of a sergeant. Above the Justicars are chaplains, tech marines, and librarians, just as you would have for any other chapter. Each fulfills a specialist role, providing support to the purely battle-focused marines. Above these support specialists, you have brother captains. Each of these senior Astartes leads a brotherhood into battle. They're effectively the frontline commanders, where the Grandmasters are more focused on the managing of the brotherhood in its entirety. Each brotherhood also boasts a brotherhood champion, a warrior whose sole responsibility is to keep his captain alive by any means necessary. Every brotherhood also specializes in a certain aspect. For example, the first brotherhood is in charge of the chapter armory, and thus has all of the chapter's tech marines, though it's still effectively a battle company. Basically, where other chapters have the librarium and armory as separate from its companies, the Grey Knights have theirs rolled into their companies. In addition to the 8 brotherhoods, the Grey Knight have 2 orders who specialize in their own form of demon annihilation. It's unclear if these orders existed when the Grey Knights were first founded, though it seems like they may have. These orders are where the Grey Knights no longer operate like Codex chapters. Orders aren't brotherhoods, and aren't organized like them. The first of these orders is the Paladins. They're essentially the Grey Knights' first company. From all the brotherhoods, the very best are taken to join the Paladin Order. The Grey Knights 5th edition Codex 2011 illustrates just how difficult it is to become one of these fabled paladins. Aspirants to join the Paladin Order must first complete 8 quests to ascend to their rank. We won't go into detail on all of them, but one of them is to slay a herald of each of the Chaos Gods, without their armor. And that's not even the hardest of the trials. After completing the trials and becoming a paladin, that warrior will be assigned to a Grand Master. They'll act as that Grand Master's bodyguard, advisor, and champion. This means you end up with small squads of paladins in every brotherhood. Effectively, they act like the first company, attaching small units to other strike forces, but permanently. Along with this, they're also charged with guarding any apothecaries who take to the battlefield. The head of the Paladin Order is known as the High Paladin. The second order is the Purifiers, where the Paladins are the martial peak of the Grey Knights. The Purifiers are their spiritual peak. The Purifiers effectively cultivate faith and fanaticism so strongly within themselves that they light their soul aflame. They become a spiritual incarnation of zealous devotion. The Purifiers are the most incorruptible souls in the galaxy, and can literally harness that purity to eradicate some of the most powerful demons. We can't give you much detail on the Purifiers as their order is mostly secret. Not even the Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights knows the full details of their operations. Though one of their most sacred duties is to guard a prisoner, sealed within Titan in the Chamber of Purity. They'll even slay their own brothers should they try to see what's inside. We have no idea at all what the Purifiers are guarding, but we do know that should whatever they're guarding escape, it likely means the doom for all Titan. Their order is headed by the Castellan Champion, a warrior of the greatest purity and skill in the chapter, Castellan Crow. You may have noticed that unlike a normal chapter, the Grey Knights have no scout company. The Brotherhoods too do not maintain scouts. The Grey Knights draw their recruits purely from the black ships bound for Terra. The black ships are part of the Astra Telepathica, and they go around the Imperium gathering up unsanctioned psychers. Many of these psychers end up sacrificed to the Golden Throne. Some are sent off to be trained for use as astropaths, Primaris psychers, or one of the many other sanctioned psyker roles the Imperium employs. The very best, though, are sent to Titan. According to the 10th edition Grey Knights Codex 2025, these aspirants are chosen by the Chamber of Gatherers, a unit within the Grey Knights whose sole duty is the selection and training of these aspirants. Our good friend the Gaming Storyteller has a whole video on the black ships that I'll link down below. It's extremely detailed, and you should go and watch it if you want to know more. After selection, the Space Marine neophyte is taken to the Chamber of Trials, where they are put through 666 trials. These trials are known as the Rituals of Detestation, which are meant to ensure the aspirant is able to withstand the horrors the Grey Knight face every day. These rituals are so brutal that they are meant to be able to break a regular Space Marine mentally. Along with these trials, the aspirant is put through a ton of psychosurgery and bioengineering to enhance them far beyond a normal Astartes. Should the recruit survive the rituals, they are then assigned to a Justicar, who will oversee the rest of their training. The Justicar will usually hail from the 8th Brotherhood, who are charged with the overseeing of the recruits. From here, the aspirant essentially has to do a dungeon crawl, with a few other aspirants in their Justicar through the Chamber of Trials. At some point during this training, they are given a new name. This name is essentially a perfect opposite to a demon's true name. This means that simply speaking a Grey Knight's name can, on occasion, cause great pain to a demon. Upon finally reaching the top, they are accepted into the Grey Knights. In addition to all other regular organs of an Astartes, a Grey Knight has a ton of silver purity wards implanted under their skin. Basically, since their founding, the Grey Knights have operated in secret, fighting really only against demonic incursions. A great example of this is the War of the Beast. This was a war against the Orcs so titanic that it threatened to destroy Terra itself. We know from the novel Beheading 2016 that the Inquisition considered the Grey Knights too valuable to be used in the War of the Beast. So basically, from their founding to modern 40k, the Grey Knights were just fighting demons entirely in secret, killing or mind-wiping anyone who discovered their existence, according to the Grey Knights 5th edition Codex 2011. Probably their most notorious event, though, is the First War of Armageddon and the Months of Shame. So the First War of Armageddon is essentially secret. Not many in the Imperium even know about it. That's because it was essentially the Grey Knights, the Space Wolves, and a bunch of guardsmen fighting a massive demonic incursion. This invasion from the warp was of course led by the demon Primarch Angron. According to the 2nd, 3rd edition Space Marine Codex 2002, this war started when Angron left the Eye of Terror in a Space Hulk. The Eye of Terror was essentially a massive warp rift, the biggest in the galaxy, and preceded the Cicatrix Maledictum as the biggest chaos threat to the Imperium. Space Hulks are big amalgamations of ships that drift in and out of the warp. This Hulk effectively acted as an invasion fleet, and Armageddon was flooded with demons and World Eaters. The defenders of Armageddon met these demons with faith and fire, holding them back till the Grey Knights were able to slay Angron. It took the Grey Knights over 100 Terminators to bring Angron down. Angron was personally banished by Knight Captain Taramar Aurelian. Of the over 100 Grey Knights deployed, only 13 survived. These events were shown to us in the novel Emperor's Gift 2012, which also covers the far more infamous aftermath of the war, the Months of Shame. The Months of Shame, in summary, was a conflict between the Ordo Malleus and the Space Wolves. After the war on Armageddon, the Inquisition wanted to purge the planet's population and the Imperial Guard, for fear they had been corrupted by exposure to the demonic. The Space Wolves objected. This disagreement grew so heated that Logan Grimnar, chapter master of the Space Wolves, killed Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights. This led to Fenris effectively being blockaded and an entire Imperial battle fleet hanging over the planet, threatening exterminatus upon it. Finally, in large part to Bjorn the Fell-Handed calming his hot-headed chapter master, the Space Wolves stood down. This conflict often goes presented as a win for the Space Wolves, but it really isn't. Their chapter was, make no mistake, on the verge of annihilation. If Bjorn hadn't stepped in, the Space Wolves wouldn't exist. That being said, Grimnar and the Space Wolves did kind of butcher the Grey Knights, in the few actual skirmishes that had made up the Months of Shame. As the Era Indomitus dawned, the Grey Knights were actually the first to respond to the Great Rift. The opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum was essentially Chapter 666's worst nightmare. Masses of demonic incursions plagued the Imperium as detailed in Gathering Storm 3, Rise of the Primarch 2017. The Grey Knights are right there, fighting alongside the arisen Rabute Guilliman. They take massive casualties during this period. Some Grandmasters aren't surviving more than 4 deployments. The casualty turnover rate here is insane. According to the 8th edition Core Rulebook 2017, their heaviest casualties are in Imperium Nihilus, which faces possibly the largest demonic invasions in Imperial history ever. Pretty much every major battle in this period has a Grey Knight presence, from the Battle of Lion's Gate on Terra all the way to the Plague Wars. The Knights of Titan are at the forefront of each one. A side note, the Battle of Lion's Gate is a massive conflict against the demonic legions of Khorne. According to the 9th edition Grey Knight Codex 2021, the Grey Knights stood shoulder to shoulder with the Talons of the Emperor, aka the Sisters of Silence and the Custodes. Yes, they stood and fought next to blanks, each and every Grey Knight in excruciating pain. It's also the start of a trend where we're seeing a lot of the Grey Knights and Custodes working together. Things are only getting worse for the Grey Knights. The tumultuous times of the Dark Imperium have led to the loss of numerous black ships, meaning fewer recruits for the Knights of Titan. Demonic activity is at an all-time high, and the 10th edition Grey Knight Codex 2025 says they're facing a manpower crisis. Half of their chapter council is dead, and quite frankly the Grey Knights are at breaking point. They've received no Primaris reinforcements, as it seems like Karl may even be unaware of their existence, though this may change. We're very likely to see the annihilation of the Grey Knights if something doesn't change soon, however. To put all of this into perspective though, this is kind of the point of the Grey Knights. They were the first line of defense against the demons. They have undeniably bought the Imperium time. In Crusade Armageddon 2025, the Grey Knights seal a massive warp gate into the realm of Khorne and banish Angron. Of course, at a heavy price. Effectively, they're fighting a series of desperate last stands, holding back these massive demonic threats, but time is running out. Which leaves us with a horrifying question. What happens when they finally break? How does the Imperium close the warp gates without the Grey Knights? Not even the mighty Custodes, who eclipse the Grey Knights in martial skill and armament, can do that. To make this point immensely clear as to why this is such a huge problem for the Imperium, we see in the novel Angron, the Red Angel 2023, the 13 survivors of the First War of Armageddon try to banish Angron. They nearly succeed because the Grey Knights had uncovered part of the Primarch's true name. This effectively counters the Primarch, and the Red Angel is only saved by external intervention. The only people we've ever really seen be able to take out demon Primarchs consistently are the Grey Knights and other Primarchs. It's not their martial skill that makes the Grey Knights so important to the Imperium, it's their arcane knowledge and their ability to find more of it. With the lore we currently have, the Grey Knights have taken roughly over 70% casualties, and most of their Grandmasters are dead. This lore is currently advancing a lot at the moment, and we'll see what the future brings. Right now though, it doesn't look good. Normally we'd start talking about the weapons and armor employed by the Grey Knights, but we've already covered that in our All Space Marine Weapons video, and our All Space Marine Vehicles video. The Grey Knights, at the end of the day, just use the stuff most Space Marines do. They of course primarily use force weapons instead of chain weapons and power weapons, and of course they do have unique firearms. The only exceptionally unique piece of equipment they have though is the Dread Knight. Everything else is basically a piece of Astartes war gear refined to be absolutely devastating to demons. So instead of rehashing information we've already gone over in other videos, we thought we'd talk about the Grey Knights' place in the setting. The Grey Knights are a faction who have changed a lot in the history of 40k. They're currently changing right now, with new lore hitting us multiple times this year alone. So we thought we'd cover these changes, so you can get the full scope of where this faction is in the lore at the moment. Back in 3rd edition, a lot of the lore we've talked about so far was canon. A majority of the Demon Hunters Codex 2003 is about the Grey Knights. The Demon Hunters were primarily an ally army, one way you would take your other Imperial forces alongside whatever. Hence why back in the original Dawn of War game, the Grey Knights were a unit for the Space Marine faction. That all changed in 5th edition with the release of a new codex. This made the Grey Knights into their own full army, separate from the forces of the Inquisition. Now, GW, when they introduce a new faction, they often like to make them the hottest thing in town, rules-wise and often lore-wise too. We saw this most recently with the Votan, whose rules on release were so busted they got nerfed before they were even properly released. We also saw this lore-wise with the Votan. For example, they suddenly were credited with the invention of the Tau Empire's most iconic weapon, the railgun. All of this was in their 9th edition Codex 2022. The Grey Knight 5th edition Codex 2011 painted these guys as the strongest force in the Imperium. They were doing stuff that hadn't been seen in 40k at this point. And this was back in 2011, the Horus Heresy narrative was in its early days, which meant we didn't have the feats of the Primarchs to put these actions into context with. The Grey Knights were summoning legions of the dead, surviving in the warp, and a myriad of other acts that were unprecedented in 2011. Unsurprisingly, this codex wasn't well received, especially as it was written by Matt Ward, who was at the height of his hatred in the community, and I'm sure many of you watching this video have some idea of how infamous he was. So for a while, Grey Knights were sat around at the absolute peak of power in 40k. That all changed though with the introduction of another faction in 7th edition. We are, of course, talking about the Adeptus Custodes. Yes, the Custodes have been floating around in lore since the creation of 40k. They just have never been covered in any real detail. In fact, up until 2010, most of their lore was restricted to the Horus Heresy Visions books, a lot of which has been since outdated. Their lore started to ramp up in 2010 with the release of the first Heretic. By the time their 7th edition codex came out in 2017, they'd been firmly established as someone you didn't want to mess with because of the Horus Heresy. Yet, the 7th edition codex jumped this to an extreme, establishing the Custodes as the single most powerful force in 40k. They only then get more powerful from there, with greater and greater feats being introduced into the lore, to the point we're at now, where the idea of a Grey Knight being able to put a scratch on a Custodes is often considered laughable. Which is kind of the crux of the issue with the Grey Knights. If the foundation of the Grey Knights is their Space Marines but better, which is the foundation that was laid down all the way in 3rd edition, then the introduction of Custodes and then Primaris has, well, lessened that. The Grey Knights started to feel more like Space Marines who were just good at killing demons. Which is fine, but a far step down from what they once were. A Grey Knight doesn't feel all that powerful when contrasted with a Custodian. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does kind of present the Grey Knights with an identity problem, one the Terminus Decree has really exposed. The discussion around the Terminus Decree showed how overwhelmingly silly the idea that the Grey Knights could beat the Custodes was. We've already had a whole video discussing that though, that I'll link down below. What we're talking about here is how that change in lore reflects how the Grey Knights have changed. They're framed as far more desperate in modern 40k than they once were. What we're seeing with the Grey Knights is a bit of an identity change. They're becoming far more like the Crimson Fists, a chapter on the brink of destruction, which is oddly fitting for them. They're no longer these god-tier demon slayers, making the Neverborn look like wimps. Instead, every victory is now rife with sacrifice and drenched in blood. They've gone from the knights in storybooks slaying dragons with ease, clad in shining armor, to something more akin to Game of Thrones. Knights clad in blood-smeared plate, wrestling in filth and death so they can strangle another guy. It's a great example of how desperate the Imperium is starting to feel. Another aspect of the community attitude we've seen with the Terminus Decree stuff is that the Grey Knights are kind of suffering from the Worf effect. For those of you who don't know, the Worf effect is a trope, where a character in a show is meant to be very good at fighting, but only to make the bad guy look intimidating when they beat that character up. A good example of this in 40k is the Avatar of Cain, or Demon Princes, who are meant to be extremely powerful, devastating foes, but are memed on for how often they end up getting killed. This is slowly becoming the same with the Grey Knights. The situations the Grey Knights deal with are horrifically deadly. We're talking full demonic legions breaching into our reality, facing Angron and purging demon planets. These are threats that are meant to be capable of wiping out whole chapters of Space Marines. Yet they're all the Grey Knights face. So when they come out of these encounters with high casualties, it makes them look weak, when in fact it's simply because the threats they face are so great. Honestly, what would help this is if we saw more instances of demonic legions wreaking havoc in the Imperium at large. Have these greater demons that the Grey Knights spend their time hunting really mess up some established chapters. Still, the Grey Knights codexes and lore constantly talk about how they face threats that make other Astartes go insane. Yet, we've never seen that happen, so it all just feels like propaganda. I mean, we have seen at least one instance of this, which was in Arcs of Omen Angron 2023, where most of an Indomitus Crusade fleet falls to the madness of Khorne. So hopefully more stuff like this happens and the fans will start to see the Grey Knights aren't just regular old Space Marines. To finish off this video, we thought we'd talk about perhaps the Grey Knight's most infamous character, Kaldor Drago, the current Supreme Grand Master of the Grey Knights. So, according to the 5th edition Grey Knights Codex 2011, Kaldor Drago has done something near no other character in all of 40k has done. He has survived in the realm of chaos. You see, Drago has a curse on him. After banishing the Lord of Change, Makakan, the demon cursed Drago to be pulled into the warp alongside them. Now in the warp, Kaldor Drago has performed some insane feats. He slayed a bloodthirster with a broken sword, burned jungles of Nurgle, killed another Lord of Change and destroyed his citadel. No demon could corrupt him nor slay him. He effectively became the boogeyman for all demons, where only the most insane followers of Khorne would dare assault him. He has killed thousands upon thousands of demons while trapped in the warp. Though all of his achievements have been undone by the warp, the jungles regrew, the walls were rebuilt, and the demons slayed have reincarnated. To be trapped inside the warp is to be timeless. It should be impossible to endure, but Drago does. The closest thing to it in all of Warhammer is Gotrek from Warhammer Fantasy. He too was trapped in the realm of chaos and survived, but Gotrek is literally a god. Now, we know Age of Sigmar's warp and 40k's warp are two separate things, but it's the closest comparison we have. Drago isn't completely trapped in the warp though. Essentially, Chaos worshippers can accidentally summon him. If they open a warp portal, he can step through, and won't be sent back to the warp for a little bit. We actually see something similar to this in the newish Chaos Gate game, where at the very end of the game, Kaldor Drago is summoned to help the squad of Grey Knights fight Mortarion. Though he is of course forever doomed to be thrust back into the Immaterium. In the Grey Knights 10th edition Codex 2025, with all the crises the chapter is facing, it's shown that they're considering declaring him lost and electing a new Supreme Grand Master. The Grey Knights in modern 40k are a shattered silver shield, once glorious, once powerful, once a sight without comparison. They strode in silver armor, bedecked in bones and incomprehensible wards. For 10 1,000 years, they waged a secret war to protect the Imperium from its single greatest threat, sending back into the warp monsters that could fell whole sectors. Monsters that are now breaking through in greater numbers than ever before. Still, they were the first on the wall. They bought the Imperium precious time at the cost of their lives, fighting blood-soaked battles against impossible odds, waiting for reinforcements to arrive. When they did, they stood shoulder to shoulder with them. It was the Custodes and Chapter 666 who pulled the Imperium back from the brink of destruction. The Grey Knights may well be broken, but they are undaunted. Whatever may come, whatever is required, the Knights of Titan, the last hope of Malcador, will answer. Behind every paragraph and reference in these videos, there's a mountain of research, editing, and more than a few burnt-out cogitators. That's where our patrons come in, with multiple tiers offering a variety of things, from exclusive chats in our Discord to personalized artwork created for our individual patrons. Every subscription keeps the machine spirit of the Astartes Anonymous YouTube channel appeased. And for our top-tier patrons, a display on the Wall of Honor at the end of each podcast. So if you're enjoying the content, please do consider taking a quick look at our Patreon. Thanks so much for watching.